If you like the following story, please consider liking and subscribing. Your support helps more than you know. We will have more stories coming shortly. Thank you for choosing this one to listen to. My mornings had always been filled with routine thoughts. Coffee, the drive, the list waiting at my desk, but nothing stood out more than the time I spent with my family. My work week was often chaotic and overwhelming, but weekends were sacred. They were my chance to focus on what mattered most, time with my daughter Sophie and my mother. Saturdays became my beacon of hope amidst the busyness. Growing up, family was a constant foundation. My father always reminded me that work wasn't everything, that it was the small moments with loved ones that truly shaped us. I carried that lesson into my own life. The thought of laughter-filled afternoons with my family kept me grounded, even if I didn't always realize it at the time. On this particular Friday morning, I was already thinking about the weekend. With just one more day of work, I was excited for the time I'd spend with my 4-year-old daughter Sophie and my mom. My wife Heather was away, traveling for work, and wouldn't be home until Sunday night. It would just be Sophie and me. After dropping Sophie at kindergarten, I headed to the office, expecting to spend the morning updating a course catalog. Surprisingly, I finished by 10. Back home in an empty house, I made a sandwich and started packing for the weekend. As I juggled the sandwich and luggage, I knocked a shampoo bottle under the bed. Reaching for it, my hand brushed against something else, a small leather book. I pulled it free and stared. Heather's journal. I hesitated, unsure if I should read it. Curiosity got the better of me. The entry was dated April 15, 2008. Heather wrote about feeling trapped, fearing the consequences of her actions. Her boss, James Carrington, had accused her of mishandling company money. He then offered her a way out, a new position with more pay and responsibility, promising to fix the problem if she agreed to work as his personal assistant. Her words shook me. She admitted she took the position, describing it as a lifeline, hoping it would protect us. Then came a line that stopped me cold. I had no choice. Every decision I make now is about protecting Andrew and Sophie, even if it destroys me in the process. My heart raced as I read further, shaken by her raw honesty. She explained how her boss, Mr. Carrington, offered her a new position with more pay and responsibility, promising to help her out. Heather explained how Carrington planned to cover the missing funds by shifting them into another account. He reassured her she'd be cleared and no one would suspect. She wrote about hiding this from me, wanting to deal with it herself, and about moving into her new office beside Carrington's private lounge. The next entry was darker. Heather described how coworkers had started giving her strange looks. Rumors spread. Carrington called her into his office to outline her new duties. Alongside assistant tasks, he demanded she accompany him to events, dress to his standards, and obey. If she refused, he threatened to expose her for theft. If I resist, he said Sophie will suffer. He looked me dead in the eye and told me she'd see a slow death and worse would come for Andrew. I can't let that happen. This isn't about me anymore. It's about keeping them safe. Tears stung my eyes as I read. Heather recounted his demand that she abandon formal business attire, no pantyhose, no bra, skirts shorter each week. She described her dread and humiliation, but also the threat looming over her if she resisted. Mr. Carrington called her in to inspect her appearance, even asking if she was wearing a bra. She confirmed she wasn't, and I felt sick. The entries grew worse. Daily inspections. Carrington escalating until he forced her to strip in his office. By Friday, he had her completely undressed and naked. I could barely process what I was reading. Heather had been suffering through this nightmare, and I had no idea her words described the pain she endured and how each day she felt more trapped. She wrote about how Mr. Carrington eventually demanded even more from her, threatening our daughter Sophie if she refused. He told her she had no choice, and after much pressure she gave in to his demands. Tears filled my eyes as I read on. She explained how one evening, Mr. Carrington made even more vile threats, and she felt she had no way out. She mentioned how she thought about telling me but was afraid of the consequences, so she chose to deal with it herself. I could barely believe it. This was the nightmare Heather had been living through, and I hadn't seen any of it. My heart broke as I read how she had been forced into these impossible situations, all while trying to protect me and our family. I had no choice. Rachel wrote, describing how everything spiraled out of control. She had been forced to serve other executives, becoming nothing more than an object passed around. James told me I was now available to all the higher-ups and potential clients. I had become the company's personal plaything. I sat on the edge of the bed, stunned, trying to process everything my wife Heather, the woman I loved and trusted, reduced to this. Her journal continued. I'm writing this to document how I became the Thompson Corporation office hooker. Maybe one day this record will help me escape. I know Andrew would leave me and take Sophie if he found out. I hate myself for hurting him, but I was manipulated. I didn't see it until it was too late. Now I'm in so deep there's no stopping it. All I want is to protect Andrew and Sophie. God help me and forgive me the overwhelming betrayal and loss. Every time I give in, she wrote, I tell myself I'm buying my family one more day of peace. I don't know how long I can keep surviving like this. The Heather I knew, the woman who laughed with me in the kitchen, who kissed Sophie's forehead every night, was trapped in a nightmare I hadn't seen. It hit me like a tidal wave. Heather had been manipulated and trapped, trying desperately to protect us all while keeping this devastating secret. I suddenly noticing that my shirt was soaked with tears. I hadn't even realized I was shedding anger and pain surged in beside me. I wanted to scream punch something. Maybe even confront James or worst of all, Heather herself. But at the same time, I felt numb, like I was the one drowning. My vision blurred. I set the journal down and realized my shirt was wet with tears. I stumbled to the bathroom and vomited. Back in the bedroom, I straightened our wedding photo I'd knocked askew, staring at the smiling woman in the frame and trying to reconcile her with the words on the page. The phone rang. Sophie's school. I'd lost track of time. I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said, guilt catching up with me. At pickup, Sophie ran into my arms, frustration dissolving into a tight hug. I took the long way to my mom's to clear my head. By the time we arrived, Sophie was asleep in the back seat. I carried her in and tucked her into the spare bed. Mum met me in the hall. I'll start on your list, I said. Ever since Dad passed, I'd handled her repairs. I grabbed the pruning saw and headed to the backyard. As dusk fell, I worked through branches and overgrowth, the journal turning in my mind. Tears came and went without warning. When I finally sat on the back step, spent, Mum slipped outside and sat beside me. What's wrong? She asked quietly. Something in me gave way. I broke down in her arms, sobbing hard and long, the way I hadn't in years. When I could breathe again, I told her, I found something about Heather, something that makes me think we can't stay together. I'm so angry, but I still love her. I don't know if I'm strong enough to do what comes next. Mum listened, steady as ever. You're a good man, Andrew. You'll do the right thing, whether that's forgiving her or moving on. But whatever you choose, don't let Sophie get hurt. She needs her dad more than ever. I'm here, always. Her words gave me something to hold on to. Thanks, Mum. I'll make sure Sophie isn't hurt. We went inside to check on Sophie, fast asleep, small hands curled into fists. I sat in the quiet house, the journal heavy in my bag, and felt the ground shifting under my feet. Saturday, March 15th. I barely slept. At first light, I sat on the edge of the bed with a knot in my stomach. From the kitchen came the smell of Mum's fried apples. Morning, I said as I walked in. Morning, she answered, giving me the kind of look that says everything without words. Eat, then figure it out. After breakfast, I asked, can you watch Sophie today? I need to go to the old spot by the river. I won't do anything reckless. I just need to think. She hesitated, then nodded. Of course, be careful. Sophie and I will have a good day. I finished a few chores I'd promised to do around the house, took Heather's journal and 2 beers, and headed for the riverbank where I'd gone as a kid whenever life felt too loud. It had always been my quiet place. By the river that Saturday afternoon, I opened the journal again. I had brought it with me, along with 2 beers, where I used to sit as a boy. It was my quiet place, an escape. Now it became the place where I confronted the truth. The entries grew more disturbing. October 20th, 2007, Heather described being taken to a regional office after Carrington handed out bonuses to his salesmen. As part of their reward, she was forced to submit to them one by one in a hotel room for 2 hours. The first man came in and I had sex. The second only wanted oral. By the third guy, I was exhausted when the department manager arrived. I was completely drained that night. I slept with James, too. By the end, I told myself it was survival, that if I endured this, Andrew and Sophie would be safe another day. I slammed the book shut, bile rising in my throat. The grass swayed gently around me, the river flowing steady, but my world had collapsed into chaos. Her tone changed as the entries went on, sometimes detached, sometimes almost casual, like she had split into 2 people. The wife and mother I knew, and this other version of herself trapped in Carrington's orbit. I'm nothing more than a hooker for the company now, she wrote. But every time I give in, I whisper to myself, do it for them. Protect Andrew, protect Sophie. That's the only way I can survive. I shut my eyes. The words cut like knives. By Sunday, I made up my mind. When Heather returned from her trip, I would confront her. If she lied or refused to tell me the truth, I'd take Sophie and leave. Divorce was too simple for what she had done, for what she had hidden. And Carrington, one way or another, I would deal with him. As I read more of Heather's journal, it became a catalog of her exploits. She described a manager's only Christmas party, a New Year's event, where over 20 people, both men and women, had used her entertaining clients throughout the year, and even sleeping with local law enforcement in exchange for company favors. She also described a wild management retreat where she performed alongside dancers in ways no one would ever forget. It was as though she had split into two people, the loving wife and mother at home and someone I didn't recognize at all at work. Her last entry had been written just a week ago, which meant she was probably at it again. I couldn't read anymore. I closed the journal, leaned over the edge of the river, and threw up. Then I lay back in the grass and cried, overwhelmed with disgust, anger, and misery. How could I have been so blind looking back? Maybe there were signs, but I never doubted Heather. She always told me when something was wrong. Maybe in her mind this wasn't a problem. We never fought. She did her part at home and was an amazing mother to Sophie. Sure, our physical relationship had slowed, but I chalked it up to her demanding job. Now I wondered how many times I had been unknowingly betrayed. Heather had always been easily manipulated by men. Her father controlled her until she went to college, and then she dated a man who used her emotionally and sexually, tossing her aside when he was done. I met her after she had been fired from a restaurant where the owner had secretly been filming her in the bathroom. She was too trusting, especially with men, and I hadn't paid enough attention to the men around her. Hindsight really does suck. Sunday night, 9 p.m., the door opened. Heather came in, suitcase in hand, smiling faintly. "Hi, honey. How was your weekend? Did Sophie behave?" I glared at her, rage boiling just beneath the surface. "Not as good as yours, I imagine. I only got screwed by one person. You probably had dozens." Her smile fell. "What are you talking about? I worked all weekend." I hurled the journal across the room. It struck the china cabinet, glass shattering. Heather froze, stunned. Slowly, she picked it up, clutching it to her chest. Without a word, she walked outside, sitting on the porch swing. From the window, I watched her sob, mascara streaking down her cheeks. When she finally came back hours later, she sat across from me, placing the journal on the table. "Now you know," she said, her voice broken. "What are you going to do?" "I haven't decided yet," I said coldly. "Are you going to divorce me?" she whispered. "I don't know yet." Her hands shook as she stared down at the table. "I'm almost relieved you found out. I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you or Sophie. I'm so tired, Andrew. Tired of the lies, the manipulation, the control. I just want to be normal again." "I read your journal," I said, my voice heavy. "I have only one question. Was this weekend more of the same?" She lowered her head. "Yes." I clenched my jaw. "Did you do it voluntarily? Did you enjoy it? Because from what I read, it seems like you were really into it, maybe more than with me." "No," she said quickly. "I didn't enjoy it more than being with you. It's different. I love you, Andrew, more than you will ever know. I never wanted to hurt you. I do enjoy the attention, and sometimes the sex. But it's not the same. With you, it's love. With them, it's just sex and survival." Her voice cracked. "No matter what I say, I sound like a lying, cheating whore. And I am. I won't deny that sometimes I felt something in the moment. But every time afterward, I hated myself. I hated lying to you. But I was trying to protect you. Protect Sophie. That's the only reason I stayed in it." "Is that what you wanted to hear?" she asked. I took a deep breath, unsure of what I even wanted. "I don't know. But at least you're not lying anymore. I don't think you could lie your way out of this." We sat in silence. Finally, Heather whispered, "So, is there still an us?" I shook my head slowly. "I am not sure. I don't see how. You chose this life over your family. I've been lied to for months. You abandoned Sophie and me for your so-called clients. No, there's no us anymore. That ended the moment you got on your knees for James Carrington." Heather's face crumpled, her voice breaking. "Andrew, you do realize I had no choice. I was trying to protect the family." Her words hung between us, raw and pleading, but I couldn't let them in. I added, and speaking of James Carrington, "I'm going with you on Monday. I'm going to beat the hell out of him while you clear out your desk. He may have blackmailed you, but you chose to stay in this nightmare. Everyone involved deserves to pay, and I'll start with him." I paused, letting my anger simmer. You know, during the Cold War, they had a term called nuclear response, swift and devastating retaliation. If I could, I'd shove an atom bomb up Carrington's ass and press the button. I want everyone responsible to pay, and I don't care about collateral damage. But for now, I'll settle for knocking the life out of him on Monday." Heather looked at me, her face pale. "Andrew, don't do something reckless. He's powerful and dangerous. He will ruin you just like he did me." I stood my ground. "On Monday, one way or another, I'll end this. Now get out of my sight." Heather ran from the room, sobbing, slamming the door to the guest bedroom behind her. I grabbed a couple more beers, knowing I wouldn't sleep if I couldn't rest. I'd at least drink until I passed out. March 17th, 2008, Monday. Heather sat silently beside me as I drove her to work. She had cried all night. I could hear her through the thin walls every time I got up. When we arrived, her badge got us through security. She went to her office. I marched straight toward Carrington's door, fists clenched. Before I could reach it, two massive guards seized me, one by the throat, slamming me to the floor, the other pinning my arms. I struggled, but it was useless. Carrington emerged from his office, smirking. "I've been expecting you," he said. "These are my men. They'll do whatever I tell them, including breaking your neck or finding your daughter." My blood ran cold. "As for Heather," he sneered, "she's mine now, my personal plaything. Try anything, and you'll never live to see Sophie's 5th birthday." I could barely breathe through the rage and the crushing weight on top of me. I wanted to destroy him, but I was outnumbered and helpless. Carrington leaned in closer. "Let me show you how powerless you really are," he whispered. He called for Heather, and her trembling voice came from the doorway. "Please, James, don't hurt him. Please, no. Shut up and get over here." Carrington barked. "Let us show your husband what you do for us." The guards lifted me into a chair, cuffing my hands and feet, and gagged me. I was forced to watch, trapped and enraged. "Heather, strip," Carrington demanded. She hesitated, glancing at me, but when he whispered something in her ear, she began unbuttoning her blouse, tears streaming down her face. She stripped piece by piece until she was forced to kneel before him. I turned my head away in disgust. Rough hands clamped my jaw, forcing me to look. "No," one of the guards growled. "You will watch." Every second seared into me like acid. When Carrington had finished on her, he calmly zipped his trousers. Heather, broken and sobbing, wiped her face with shaking hands. She looked across at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Andrew," she cried, her voice shattering the air. Her words ripped through me sharper than any blade. My chest burned, my vision blurred, and rage boiled so hot I thought I'd explode. But the restraints held me down, crushing me in helplessness. The last thing I heard was Carrington's cold laugh as darkness swallowed me whole. I woke in a hospital bed. An IV in my arm, a cast on my right arm, ribs wrapped tight, jaw wired shut, one eye swollen nearly shut, the other staring at the white ceiling above me. My body screamed with pain, but my mind was worse. The door opened and a man stepped in, the chief of police. He smiled as though we were old friends. "How are you feeling, Mr. Johnson?" he asked. "Rough few days, I hear. We found your car in a ditch. Looked like you swerved to avoid a deer." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "That's the official story anyway. But we both know better, don't we?" I glared at him, unable to answer with my jaw wired shut. "Carrington is my brother-in-law," he said casually, as if you were mentioning the weather. "He's helped me out before, and I've enjoyed a few privileges. When he called about you falling down some stairs, I took care of it. That's why you ended up off the road instead of in a morgue." He paused, letting it sink in. "If you don't go along with our version of events, I'll make your life a living hell. Pills will show up in your home. Your reputation will vanish overnight. You'll lose your job. You'll lose Sophie. And if you talk, well, you already know what will happen to Heather and to your daughter." He patted my shoulder, smirked, and walked out. 2 days later, Heather drove me home. She helped me inside, silent, her face pale and hollow. She said nothing. I didn't ask. I didn't care anymore. I had a broken arm, a wired jaw, cracked ribs, and bruises everywhere I needed help, but I didn't want hers. I hadn't seen her since the incident in Carrington's office, and now she silently took me home. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know where she had been or what she had been doing. I didn't care anymore. Neither of us spoke. She just looked broken. My body needed time to heal, knowing what I had to do when the time came. Sophie flitted in and out of the room, innocent and sweet, asking if I needed anything. She was the only light in my days. The only reason I held on. Nights dragged on in silence. I lay in bed, listening, waiting, hating. Every creak in the house reminded me of Carrington's laugh, Heather's tears, the weight of the guards pinning me down while I was forced to watch. Saturday, I had managed to make my way to the living room by myself around 6 p.m. When the door opened, Rachel came in, followed by the two men who had beaten me and Carrington himself. He placed a small gift bag next to me. He said, grinning, some DVDs to watch while you recover. I'm sure you'll enjoy them just as much as we enjoyed making them. Rachel stared at the floor, her face pale and tears streaking down her face. Heather, get me something to drink, and stay in the kitchen until I call you, Carrington ordered. She obeyed without a word. He sat across from me, leaning forward. Here's how this is going to go, Andrew. Heather will continue working for me, but now she will be available on evenings and weekends too. She'll go where I tell her and do what I want. If you so much as think about causing trouble, you know what'll happen. Maybe even worse than what you've already experienced. So be a good little husband, stay quiet, and don't make waves. I glared at him, hatred burning through every inch of me. Good, he said with a satisfied smile. We understand each other. He paused, then asked, anything you want to say. With difficulty, I managed to mumble. Your goons stopped me from saying what I really think. Carrington leaned back, amused. Oh, don't worry about them, he said mockingly. Speak your mind. I quoted, I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. Carrington looked confused, frowning. What's that supposed to mean? Speak plainly, he snapped. I'm going to make you and everyone else pay for what you've done. I'll get you all, mark my words. Carrington leaned in, smirking. How are you going to do that? You can't even protect your wife. He called Heather back into the room, taunting her. Your husband here thinks he's a hero, isn't that cute? Then turning to her, he said, you've got an appointment at the Crown Plaza with a client, go get ready. Heather went upstairs looking broken, while Carrington patted me on the head before leaving with his guards. An hour later, she came back down, beautifully, but with sadness etched into her face. I have to go. I don't know when I'll be back, she said quietly. Andrew, I'm sorry for everything. I never thought this would be our life. I love you and don't want to see you get hurt. I'll try to make a deal with James so you can take Sophie and leave. Please don't do anything drastic until I see what I can do. I don't want them to hurt you again. I couldn't bear it if I lost you. Before she left, she asked, what did you mean by that quote you told James? It's from The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, I explained. It means I will get my revenge on everyone who's wronged me swiftly and silently. Heather stared at me, her eyes filled with tears, knowing I meant her too. I still love you, she whispered. I hope one day we can heal and be a family again. I want to believe in that, Andrew. She bowed her head and left. She didn't come home that night. In fact, she didn't come home for many nights by. The bag of DVDs sat on the chair in the living room, taunting me. For days, I ignored it. I told myself I didn't care anymore, that revenge was all that mattered. But one night, curiosity clawed at me until I broke. I slid a disc into the player. Just one, I told myself. Just one, to see what they were putting her through. The screen lit up, and my heart sank. To my horror, the discs weren't business records or evidence. They were filmed like pornography, explicit and deliberate. Heather degraded over and over, servicing Carrington's clients and even his security men. It wasn't just sex. It was theater, orchestrated humiliation, filmed for his amusement. I watched only a few minutes before ripping the disc out with shaking hands. My chest ached, my throat burned. My heart broke for her, for what she'd been forced into, and yet the fury that she had hidden it from me all this time, that she had let me stand blind while she lived this life, set me alight. I shoved the DVD back into the bag, stuffed it into the closet, and slammed the door, out of sight, but never out of mind. All I wanted now was revenge. On Carrington, on his men, on anyone who had used her. Even on Heather. Heather's absences became more frequent, now on weekdays and weekends. Carrington was bold now. He visited the building of our lives as if it were his, sitting in my living room, sipping my beer, asking about Sophie in the way one asks about a possession. He never raised his voice, never needed to. He had everything that mattered: security, the police chief, favors, and a web of men who owed him. He started with thin-veiled threats. I hope your daughter enjoys kindergarten, he'd say, smiling. Once he'd laid the groundwork, he tightened the leash. You know how this works, he told Heather one afternoon. You keep helping, you keep the house, you keep your family quiet, and I keep things contained. His hand brushed her hair as she sat across from him, shoulders bowed. Sometimes he made more overt visits. Once he stopped by while I was at work, claiming a business issue with the branch. Heather sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug, exhausted. She looked dried out, like a candle that had burned too long. You're doing well, Carrington said suavely. We appreciate what you do for the company. There are clients who prefer your discretion. The unspoken word hovered in the air. She nodded. It's for Andrew and Sophie, she whispered. He smiled, not unkindly. Weeks bled into months. Heather went in and out, coming home late some nights, gone for days on others. She answered to Carrington's calls instantly. I kept my distance, tried to live a life around the hole in our marriage. I wanted to be the father Sophie needed, so I became professional, efficient, a shell that did what needed to be done. April 27, 2008. Sunday. My injuries were healing and the bandages were off, and I could eat with only mild discomfort. Heather came home early in the morning around 6 a.m. Fully clothed, but completely exhausted, she collapsed into bed without saying a word. Something she'd been doing a lot lately. She was barely around these days, and I'd been keeping track of her comings and goings, still planning my revenge. I had a plan, one that would take down everyone responsible for my suffering and Heather's. I knew deep down that she was a victim too, but I didn't care anymore. She continued living this life willingly, choosing her work over her family. There was no chance of forgiveness. I didn't want her near me anymore. That evening, I was sitting by Sophie's swing set. When Heather came outside, "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I replied, barely looking at her. She sat at the picnic table nearby. "I've been really busy. I'm sorry for everything. I miss you and Sophie. I know you probably don't care about me anymore, but I still care about you. I haven't been able to get you out of this situation because James wants us to keep pretending like we're a happy couple. How are you holding up?" I didn't want to talk or be near her. "I'll survive," I muttered, keeping my distance. Heather hesitated, then asked, "Have you been keeping up with the journal?" "I have read it. It's going to be important, but I can't tell you why yet," I said. "I will keep it as up to date as I can for you," she replied. "Is it still under the nightstand?" I asked, her voice quieter now. "Yes," she nodded. Then asked, "Would you like something to eat?" I sighed. "Yes, I'd like something to eat." Tears filled her eyes as she said, "That's the first normal thing you've said to me since this all started." For the first time in over a month, we sat down together as a family. Heather, Sophie, and I shared dinner. But I knew this wasn't real. We were just three people in the same house pretending for a moment, and I knew it wouldn't last. April 28, 2008. Monday, I lay in bed reviewing my plan. It was perfect once it was set in motion. I would be free of Heather and free of Carrington, and I wouldn't have to worry about them anymore. Heather would face the consequences of her actions, and I could take Sophie and start fresh. Everyone who took advantage of Heather, everyone who caused her and me pain would suffer, and I made the call. May 7, 2008. Heather came home looking disheveled as usual, her hair a mess, makeup smudged and clothes hastily thrown on. Sometimes her shirt would be buttoned wrong. Once she even came home without a blouse, claiming she lost it. She waved at me and went upstairs to shower. When she came back downstairs, I told her James called. "He wants you to go to the Hilton and meet someone named Johnny." I paused, then said, "Next time, tell him I'm not his messenger. I'm done with this." I handed her the note and returned to my chair. She left without another word. I sat in the dark, tears welling up, despite myself, and broke down, crying over the love of my life full of regret. The beer wasn't helping. June 10, 2008. Heather got sick. At first I thought it was stress. She told me she had the flu. She was pale, feverish, weak in a way that made my chest tighten. She stayed away for days. When she returned, she looked as though the world had been fought out of her. I felt nothing, no sympathy, no pity, just cold resolve. I took Sophie out for ice cream and stopped by the pharmacy on the way home. June 15, 2008. I got up to take Sophie to school, but Heather had already left. It was her first time out since getting sick. Whether the flu had finally passed or Carrington had forced her back to work, I didn't know. Either way, I kept up appearances as the devoted husband not wanting another hospital visit. Christmas arrived. The strain of the year showed. She gave me a pen set for Christmas. Small, efficient, an odd choice that said more than she intended. We did the motions. Sophie was happy with a new console and something small for me and my mother, but the house felt hollow, Heather working harder than ever. She was often gone for days at a time, looking thinner and more worn out each time I saw her. We barely spoke. When she did spend time with Sophie, she would smile briefly, but it never lasted long. Christmas was quiet. February 13, 2009, Friday. The morning the phone rang, everything tilted. "I am Detective Morales," the voice on the line said. "Is this Mr. Johnson? We need you to come to the hospital. There's been an incident with your wife." The words had the bluntness of bad things that happened for no good reason. "On the way." The detective said your wife's boss had attacked her at work. Witnesses say he struck her repeatedly with a heavy object. Some co-workers pulled him off. "We don't know the motive yet, but the investigation is ongoing. Do you have any information that might help us?" At the hospital, the corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and waiting. Morales met me near the entrance with the kind of look that tries to hold things together by force of will. "Heather was found unconscious in Carrington's office," he said. Witnesses say Carrington struck her with a blunt object. They've stabilized her, but the doctors are worried. They don't know if she'll pull through. They wheeled Heather into a private ward. The machines made the only steady sounds, the slow, indifferent beep of monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen. She was barely recognizable. A sheet pulled up to her neck, bruises shadowing her skin, an IV in her arm, a bandage at her temple. Her breathing was shallow, her eyelids fluttered but did not fully open. The doctor explained what they could: internal injuries being monitored, swelling that had to be managed, the risk of complications. "We're doing everything," he said, "but she's frail. Right now she is barely awake. There's a real chance she might not come round." I sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand because it felt like the only honest possible thing. The skin was warm and thin under my fingers. Sophie stayed with Mum in the quiet room next door. We had all been told to wait. Mum's face was a small, steady presence in the chair by the window. Practical, prayerful in the old way she always was. I talked to her as if she could hear everything. I owned the anger that had lived in me, the confusion, the vengeance I had imagined. Words spilled out of me that I'd rehearsed and also hadn't. Apologies to her for not seeing sooner. Confessions about the things I'd thought and done, small, awkward things about Sophie in the future. I told her I would protect Sophie, that I would take care of everything. Hours passed in fragments, snippets of conversation with nurses, a detective's report in the corner, the telephone ringing with the lawyer's voice. Her fingers twitched once as if answering, then stilled. She was so small in the bed, the lines of her face drawn and soft. Toward evening, when the room had the gray softness of late light, Heather's eyes opened for a moment and found me. They were clouded and unfocused at first, but there was recognition there. A fragile, terrible recognition that felt like both a release and a wound. "Andrew," she breathed, voice thin as tissue. I bent close. The machines and the hospital hush closing in. "Shh," I told her, though there was no need for silence. I needed to hear the rest of what she wanted to say. "It's okay. You're here. Breathe." She fought for words, each one small and costly. "I'm sorry," she said, the syllables like an apology that had lived in her for months. "For everything. For lying, for hiding, for what you've had to live through because of me. I tried to keep you and Sophie safe. I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. I'm so sorry." Her hand tightened around mine with surprising strength, then went slack again. Mum leaned forward and placed a gentle hand on Heather's shoulder. The room was so quiet you could hear the soft scratch of a nurse's pen as she made a note at the desk. I found the forgiveness inside me in the same place heartbreak lived. Not the cheap kind, not absolving the harm, but the kind that took stock of what had been done and chose. In the end, my voice was hoarse when I said it. "I forgive you," I told her. "I forgive you for everything. I know you were trapped. I know you tried to protect us. I love you. I love you more than anything." Heather's lips trembled as she formed the words. For one long suspended heartbeat, the room held the shape of two people who had been torn by secrets and by violence, and who, in that small hour, made the work of being human mean something simpler: apology, exposure, forgiveness, love. "I love you," she whispered back, the words tender and fragile and complete. She turned her head slightly, as if listening to some sound only she could hear, and for a moment the beep of the monitor matched the rhythm of the word. Her eyes, which had grown so tired, found Sophie's picture on the bedside table, a small snapshot of the golden-haired child, and she smiled, a little, at the certainty of it. "I'm so sorry, Andrew," she said again, and then, softer, "Tell Sophie, tell her I loved being her mum." I pressed my forehead to hers, something that had been denied to us on the porch and in the boardroom. "She knows," I said. "She will always know." She then said, "I know what you did and chose, and I forgive you, Andrew. I love you always, and I always will." Heather's hand eased from mine. Her breathing slowed. The nurse leaned forward and called softly for a doctor. We all watched the monitors and the pale sweep of the screen. She blinked once, twice, and then her lips formed the last of the words in a voice so thin, it was almost the sound of the room settling. "I love you," she said, and when the three words left her, they had the weight of everything we had been and everything we had lost. Then she slipped away. Her hand fell limp in mine. The machines kept their steady rhythm for a few seconds longer, as if unwilling to accept the change. Then the tone of the monitor shifted to a new register. The doctor moved quickly. The nurse's face went controlled and professional. Mum dropped her face into her hands and sobbed in an old, uncontained way. Detective Morales stepped back like a man who knew his presence had become part of the wrongness. I sat where I was at the bed, holding the empty warmth of her fingers until the room behind me fell into a kind of flat, aching quiet. There was nothing theatrical in the moment, no catharsis, only the small, implacable fact of absence. That night the hospital made calls, arrangements began. Words had to be said to professionals who handled these things with practice and detachment. My world, which had been rearranged by the journal, the tapes, the threats, was now reduced to smaller, immediate tasks, notifications, arrangements for Sophie, calls to family, a lawyer to begin the necessary steps. Mum stayed with Sophie. For the first hours after Heather's death, Sophie was sheltered from the sharpness of it all. Mum told her gently that Heather was sleeping and that we would talk in the morning. There were later moments when the truth would arrive at Sophie's small, clear face, moments I would have to shape with care and tenderness. The grief that followed was a messy, human thing. Paperwork, the police interviews, the coroner's notes, the funeral arrangements, the meetings with lawyers. The town would talk. The papers would mark the date and move on. But in that small ward for that hour, Heather and I had said the things that mattered. She had apologized, I had forgiven her, we had said we loved one another, and then she had gone. This was not the way I wanted it to go. The life I had imagined for us had been ripped away in a few brutal hours. The guilt of her death would haunt me forever, a quiet, relentless shadow that would follow every decision I made for the rest of my life. February 16, 2009. I took the day off to arrange Heather's cremation. Mom came with me because I wasn't sure I could handle it alone. She had moved in on Saturday to help with Sophie and me, saying she would stay until things settled down. I never intended for Heather to die like that. My plan was only to get away to make her face the consequences of her choices. Now I had to live with her death, knowing that she knew what I had done and had accepted it and embraced it. How will I ever get over the guilt, I thought. February 18, 2009. At the funeral home, I signed forms. The detective Morales was there again later, and this time he told me things that shattered every remaining certainty. Andrew, he said quietly, we've been going through Carrington's things. Our cyber unit found records that changed the picture entirely. The missing money Heather was accused of mishandling? It was fabricated. Carrington set her up from the beginning. My mind stuttered. He created false transfers, false balances, everything staged to make Heather look guilty. Then he used it as leverage, blackmail. We found encrypted messages and files. In one, he told her if she resisted, if she spoke up, Sophie would suffer a slow, painful death. And he promised you would suffer even worse. The world tipped. I understand the choices she made. You need to understand, she was under constant threat. She was living in hell, Morales said. There was no judgment in his voice, only a weary comprehension. I sat back, hollow and furious. In that moment something shifted. Relief that Heather hadn't been a willing architect of this mess, and rage that she had borne it alone, shielding Sophie and me. The irony stung. I had been ready to punish her, and revenge had been in my heart. Now the path forward was no clearer. February 20th, 2009, Wednesday. I was packing up Heather's belongings from the guest room when I found her journal again. Skimming through it, I hoped to find something that might give me more insight into her life with Carrington, or how she really felt about everything, but at first it was more of the same. More entries about her affairs, more lies. Then, tucked between two pages, I found a folded note addressed in her hand. Journal, a note for Andrew. If these words find you, if you are reading this, know first that I love you. I have loved you since the day I met you, and I have loved Sophie with everything I have. I am so sorry for the wreck I have been at the heart of. There are nights I wish I could take every one of them back. I wanted to protect you both. That was always my first and only thought, keep you safe, keep Sophie safe. But I was trapped in a place I could not speak about, and my choices were never really choices. I let fear steer me. I let shame keep my mouth shut. I lied to you because I thought silence would buy us time. Time to fix what I had already broken. That silence became its own prison. I cannot undo what I did or what I became under that pressure. I am ashamed of the things I let happen. Ashamed that I let you believe things that were untrue. Ashamed for the lies and the betrayals. I tried to be brave and I failed. I tried to fight and I failed. Every time I thought I could find a way back, the world closed in harder. Please, if there is any part of you that can still hold room for me, forgive me. Forgive the sins, the betrayals, the secrecy. I know forgiveness is not owed and it may never come, but I had to say it anyway. Tell Sophie, when you think it's right, that I loved being her mother more than anything. Tell her the small things, the bedtime songs, the way I used to braid her hair, the silly faces at breakfast. Those things were true. I know I have taken from you more than I can ever repay. I am sorry beyond words. If I had been stronger, if I had been braver, none of this would have happened. I am so tired of being sorry, but I am sorry still. Always, Heather. I broke down for hours crying, tears streaming down my face. When I pulled myself together, I pulled out the detective's card and called Detective Morales. He answered, "This is Andrew Johnson." "I found something important, Heather's journal," I said. "You need to see it." "Actually, I was about to call you." He said, "There's been a major development in the case. Can I stop by this afternoon, around 2? "That's fine," I replied. At 2 p.m. Detective Morales arrived. I introduced him to my mom again, who had moved in to help with Sophie, and we sat in the living room with coffee and cookies. "Mr. Johnson," the detective began, "there's been a significant development. James Carrington was granted bail at $1 million on Monday. However, that night his wife shot and killed him." I was stunned but stayed silent as he continued. "The reason she killed him is directly tied to the next thing you need to know. Your wife tested positive for HIV. I froze. The room's spinning. "I didn't know," I whispered. "The state health department will want to test you and your daughter. I also need to ask, when was the last time you had relations with your wife?" "It's been over a year," I admitted. "We separated in March, but we stayed in the same house for Sophie's sake. We weren't together anymore." "Understood, but you still need to be tested." Morales said, "Now can you tell me why you separated?" "It's all in here," I said, handing him Heather's journal. "I also found these DVDs showing everything." She admitted to seeing other people when I confronted her, but I didn't know the full extent of it until now. The journal lays it all out, her affairs with Carrington and many others. "I don't want it in the house," I said, referring to Heather's journal. Detective Morales glanced at the journal, his eyes widening as he realized the significance of its contents. "This will be helpful." He said the health department will need a copy to track down everyone she was involved with. "We could have a larger health crisis on our hands than we originally thought." He added, "The case against Carrington is closed now that he's dead, but his wife claims she contracted HIV from him. Based on what I've read in the journal, it's likely that he got it from your wife. So far, 30 people have tested positive. As the investigations widened, details leaked. The local press seized on bits of the health department's early reports. Footage from Carrington's office. Hundreds of discs surfaced in the police files. The scale was mind-bending." Detective Morales returned with a health department preliminary report. Heather had been involved with a large number of people, more than anyone expected. The department estimated hundreds of contacts. Our small town suddenly looked like the center of an outbreak. The official numbers landed like a series of blows. The health department's preliminary tally identified 380 people connected to Heather. Of those contacted and tested, over 80 came back positive for HIV. At first the report said 56, then rose as more tests came in. Panic bloomed. The local paper dubbed it the Langdon epidemic. Reporters camped outside our house. The police had found hundreds of DVDs in Carrington's office, showing Heather with clients and colleagues. Between her journal and the tapes, the authorities had leads. The health department began contacting partners and tracking possible transmission paths. The implications were broader than anyone had imagined. My phone blew up. People wanted statements. Journalists wanted exclusive angles. The school barred me from the playground. I was labeled a health concern by fearful administrators who took the health department's caution too far. I stopped answering calls. My mother took Sophie to school and tried to keep things as normal as possible. The Langdon Corporation shut the local branch. Executives were fired, scapegoated, sued, then quietly settled. The community splintered. Marriages that had withstood other things collapsed under the weight of secret betrayals, now dragged into daylight. Detective Morales kept me informed in fragments. The police had a confession from Carrington's inner circle, and Carrington's wife had done something drastic, an act that ended his life and entangled more than one family in grief. There was no neat justice. I was contacted by an attorney who proposed suing Langdon Corporation for wrongful death and for the way they'd engineered Heather's entrapment. He suggested a parallel set of suits against the people listed in Heather's journal, 380 names that had become the focus of health inquiries and personal vendettas. I knew the idea of dragging names into court felt poisonous, but I also saw the logic, exposure, accountability, money to help Sophie. Months of legal wrangling followed. Media scrutiny turned my neighborhood into a fishbowl. The lawsuits were messy, slow. Some cases were dismissed, some settled. My attorney negotiated and steered. By the time it finished, I had roughly $1.8 million from various settlements after fees. It felt hollow. We sold the house silently, without fanfare. The physical thing was less important than the memory that lived inside it. At closing, I told the agent, "It's your house now." I'm taking only Sophie. The thought of keeping things, of keeping the traces of us, felt like cruelty. Sophie and I left town. We drove away with a handful of boxes, a sleeping child in the back, and the knowledge that we were trying to outrun a life that had become too loud with accusation, media, and shame. My mother said she might come with us. She stayed for a while, packing anyway. Years passed in small increments that were both excruciating and gentle. I told myself the money would make new things possible. Relocation, therapy, a new start. I put Sophie into school in a place where no one knew our past. I held her and watched her grow until, slowly, parts of me began to reconnect with the world. But the past kept turning up like a shadow. A local reporter's investigation had been nominated for a prize. Lawsuits dragged on. Some people I'd known turned into bitter strangers. Carrington's machinery of control left scars on many lives, and the ripple effects were still being counted. Time doesn't heal so much as it buries. You learn to carry the weight differently. June 7, 2016. I stood at a funeral home in a town I still recognized, but felt distant from. The white door seemed small against a life's worth of weather. Inside were the ashes of my oldest friend. He had been a brother in youth. We had grown apart in the cruelty of years. I stood outside, hands jammed in my pockets, paralyzed by the idea of facing faces blurred with memory. I wished I could disappear, yet the world pressed on. That's when Mrs. Alvarez, Johnny's mother, came up to me with a soft smile. Time had changed nothing about her kindness. We embraced, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something that wasn't pain. It was relief, quiet and small, that I was still capable of feeling. She told me something that surprised me. A trust fund had been set up for her grandson, Ethan. It was worth £1,000,000. Someone anonymous had done it. She asked if I knew anything about it. I lied and said I didn't. Later, she told me she had adopted her grandson legally and would use the money to help him pursue his dream of becoming a doctor. Inside, a man approached her, letting her know they were ready to begin the service. She turned to me, kissed my cheek, and said, "Please stay afterward. I'd like to talk more, and I want you to meet Josh. He's a good kid, and I think you'll really like him." With that, she disappeared into the crowd, pointing me toward the guest book. I signed it and found a seat near the back of the room, close to the exit. The woman next to me offered me a box of tissues, which I gratefully accepted. I took a handful, knowing I'd need them a few minutes later. Everyone sat down, and a young man stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for being here today. We're here to honor the life of Johnny Pino. We all know how he passed and how he struggled against that cruel disease. But today isn't about that. Today we celebrate how he lived." The speaker paused for a moment, his voice steady but emotional. Johnny was one of the kindest, most genuine souls I've ever met. He had a way of making everyone around him feel welcome no matter the circumstances. That's when it hit me. I grabbed the tissues and pressed them to my face, trying to hold back the sobs, but I couldn't. I cried for Johnny, for everything that had happened, and for the long, painful road I traveled to get here. But most of my tears were for Heather, the love and soul lost. There's a long litany of consequences I could list. The health department's figures, the fired executives, court settlements, the ways reputations were broken and rebuilt. The Langdon epidemic became a cautionary public health case. How intimacy, secrecy, and abuse of power can spread harm beyond the private. For me, the most permanent thing was the lesson about invisibility. Heather had carried a hell in secret to protect us. I'd learned the terrible cost of not seeing the people closest to me. I had polished my anger into a weapon and discovered it did not bring peace. It brought only more dead ends and a hollow victory. Sophie grew up. She asked questions at odd moments, quiet questions that pulled at the edges of a messy life. I told her what she needed to know when she needed to know it. Mostly, I taught her the small things: how to make tea, how to be blunt and kind, how to shut the door on people who would hurt her. I tried to be the parent Heather had tried to protect. Detective Morales visited once more years later, quietly, offering updates now and then, small confirmations that some things had been investigated, some people had been held to account, not everything, not everyone. He said what he could. Carrington structures had been dismantled. Some of those named in Heather's journal had been traced and treated. Others had vanished into private lives. The health department learned lessons for coordinated responses in outbreaks tied to non-consensual networks. The journal still existed somewhere in a box in a cupboard. I had read enough to know the truth, and some nights I'd open it again, not to relive, but to remind myself of the woman who had carried such a terrible weight. Her words were raw and honest, a testament to courage masquerading as guilt. In the journal she had written that she hoped, somehow, that the record would help others understand. It did. There were no clean endings. Only the slow arithmetic of living payments, school reports, a house, a place to sleep. Forgiveness came slowly and on its terms, sometimes for Heather, sometimes for myself, mostly for Sophie. If one thing remains clear, it's this: protection can come at terrible cost. Love can be a camouflage for survival, and the truth, when it arrives late, can feel like both a balm and a blade.